Why do I have cat hair on my microphone? Hey friendles, I'm Kendall, and with every project I set my mind to, something out of my control goes haywire. Anyways, in my last video, I sculpted the entirety of my Gangle doll on ZBrush, and we ended it with her being printed. You'd think painting and assembling her would be pretty straightforward at that point. It's never that simple. I'll be elaborating on that as we go, so let's just jump into the process. Now that everything's been printed, it's time for sanding. That's a pretty straightforward process. You just wet the pieces and go to town sanding. Since these pieces are clear, I want them to look shiny, so I start with the grittiest of sandpapers before hitting them with the finest of sandpapers. I didn't want to bore you with the sanding process, so here's what they look like after sanding. In hopes of making them the shiniest of shinies, I thought it'd be a good idea to brush on some more of the same clear resin I used to print the pieces. I've seen other 3D artists do this to make their clear parts look, clear, so I decided to give it a try. I was just going about my business, brushing this liquid crystal on and baking it in the UV oven. That was until... I caught that on camera! Those of you who kept up with the news probably have an idea as to why I didn't have power for half of January. So as you can imagine, working around that was so much fun. I didn't want to try my luck with the sun, since in my experience UV radiation from the sun is a bit too intense for print resin. So as a short-term solution, I decided to use this small UV lamp from a mini brand surprise ball to cure the resin enough for it not to stink. I was planning on making a video about name brand miniatures and the alternatives that can be made with things you can find at home and in the craft supply aisle, but it'll probably have to wait. Also, I may or may not have gotten into a Goosebumps kick while the power was out, so if you see a video of me making a Slappy doll pop up sometime in the future, that's why. Once the power came back on, I continued slathering resin on the inside of my doll pieces, but I soon started to see a problem. The resin didn't seem to be curing properly, and these unsightly spots started appearing. This resin is water washable, so maybe I was somehow getting water between brushed on layers of resin, but this was when I realized I should have used gloss varnish to shinify these pieces. So yeah, it was back to sanding, something I waited multiple days to do because it required power to cure, but ultimately ended up setting me back in the assembly process. After sanding these pieces again, I glossed their interior with some Liquitex high gloss varnish with an unfocused camera shot. The irony is not lost on me. To assemble the pieces, I used some clear, no-wipe UV resin that's 8 years old and stinky, and then stuck them together for a nap in the UV light oven. It cures pretty solid and doesn't need to be cleaned with alcohol, and I insist on using my supplies until they're gone. As expected, I gave the UV jointed parts the Swiggity Sandy for a hopefully seamless attachment. Moving on to painting the body ribbons, and I've got a confession to make. My perfectionism is probably glaringly obvious, but I did this more than once. Look, I don't have as steady hand as I'd like due to long-term stress-induced tremors. Thanks, progenitors. So I scrapped this initial coat not long after I applied it. I was also trying to paint with a mix of white gesso and red, and that didn't work well. I eventually tried masking the edges with painter's tape, hoping it would give me clean lines, and I couldn't tell you why I thought this was a good idea when it didn't work when I painted my Pomni doll, but you know what they say. Insanity is doing the same thing repeatedly and expecting different results. And let me tell ya, I'm on psych meds. After frustrating myself with the paint job twice over, I switched gears and put magnets into the hand limbs, mask, and the neck holdy thingy. But I didn't do it in frame for some reason. Once that was done, I put some silicone putty on the mask because the magnets were too weak to hold the mask to the neck holdy thingy. And you can only really see any semblance of this on the top left over here. So yeah, lesson learned. In more ways than one. Anyways, I went on to paint the body for the third time, this time trying to be as slow and steady as possible to keep those clean lines. Look, I know what you're thinking. Candors, you just gotta trust the process. Dolls take a long time to make. And all I have to say to that is, yeah. Painting on top of a primer is ideal, but considering you're meant to see through clear resin and the primers I have are white and gray, that ain't happening. Instead, I opted to paint multiple coats of red paint in hopes of getting a smooth, opaque application. I sound like a driver's ed video. Painting where the ribbon and the resin met was definitely the most stress-inducing part of this process. Sometimes I'd go at it with some sandpaper to try to make those paint edges as smooth and as sharp as I could. Once that was all Gucci, I went on to varnish the limbs with a gloss varnish while also blasting them with a hairdryer between coats because I was getting impatient and I didn't want to bank on the power staying on. Now that the pieces are glossified, it was time for assembly. I kinda have another confession to make. Again. And I don't know why this didn't occur to me before painting the body, but it is a good idea to make sure your pieces actually fit together. I made the mistake of just assuming they would because they seem to fit fine digitally. And I was well aware some of these pieces warped during the printing process, which would impact how they'd fit together. But yeah, the obvious doesn't always occur to me. I did a lot of sanding off screen where I had to just pray I didn't sand off any paint. But anyways, to assemble the parts I put the hinge in the lower leg and used a wire and super glue to basically make the attachment permanent. And then I did this 7 more times for the rest of the limbs. Now that the limbs are all limbed, it was time for stringing. This was surprisingly difficult as the elastic didn't always want to go past the pins. So to get it through curved spaces, I had to use a long green twist tie to essentially sew it or fish hook it through the body. Once I got that down, I sewed the elastic loop closed at the neck, and I eventually undid this entirely and restrung the arm and leg separately only to connect 2 elastic loops together in a double triangle formation, but we don't need to get into that right now. Now for the part that most people watch doll customizing videos for, it's time for the face-up. Considering the consistent and somewhat unpredictable power outages that sometimes left me with nothing to do other than doodle and twiddle my thumbs in the dark, I was very low on patience at this point. So much so I decided to jump into the face-up with black paint thinking it's just simple shapes, I can paint these on really quick. Then while painting, I remembered clean lines with my shaky bubby hands are an anomaly at best. Maybe I'm overthinking it, but using a wet brush to clean my missteps is a common occurrence. A few strokes of blue paint on her weepy peeps finish off her tragedy mask. So now it was time to paint her Manic mask. Because my shaky hands were making clean lines anxiety-inducing, I opted to lay down a base of black colored pencil to function as an underpainting I'd be following later. I used the colored pencils to draw her mask accents, using light and auburn yellow for the star, and light pink and dark magenta for the spiral, doing my best to keep the general look as flat and cartoony as possible. As expected, the black parts of her mask are painted with black acrylic paint. I go in with my thinnest brush and the lightest hand I can muster to hopefully make a nice smooth edge, and I was pretty zoned into the process for a while. You know, that is until... My phone call scared me, damn it. Hello? Hello? I'd have to look it up. Got scared by my phone ringing and I ended up painting something wrong. And I got it on camera too. Yeah, give me a minute, I'm cleaning a thing. Moving on to the mask accent shapes, I alternate between gouache and colored pencils, sometimes wetting and mixing both to get the cartoony saturated shapes I was looking for. From there, it is somewhat of a back and forth game of modifying minor details until the face-up is complete. After one last spray of Mr. Clean, my Gangle doll is now complete. As per usual, I trekked my way over to my not-so-local Ikea to take photos in their fantabulous showrooms because my apartment is boring, and hey, if it works, it works. I'm not sure if I mentioned this previously, but I got a new phone in November last year, so taking photos without having to worry about a battery life shorter than 20 minutes was definitely something. Surprisingly, I haven't abandoned my old phone. I still use it as a camera, that's always plugged in, and I use it to do laundry. No, I won't explain that last part. In case anyone's wondering about this, no, I don't just go to Ikea, use their resources, then dip. I usually have lunch and buy some of their food products actually, because I really like their plant-based meatballs. While I'm generally happy with how Gangle turned out, I had thought of a different approach I could have taken for the shoulders and hips. I do plan on remaking the Pomni and Gummy Goo dolls I previously made, so maybe I'll revisit her in the future. I do have the original files after all. I hope you enjoyed watching me make a Gangle doll, and I hope you'll stick around for whatever else I'm doing with this channel. If you'd like to see more from me, please check out my card linked in the description for all of my social medias. I usually call out my website at this point in the video, but my website is currently under construction. The plan was to have my website and this video up by the end of January, but you know, having no power for half of January and recent job stuff has kind of put a damper on that, and I prioritize making a living over these projects. But other than that, I hope you're all doing well, and if no one told you today, the world wouldn't be the same without you. Know that you're valued and you make my world a better place every day. Happy Gregorian New Year, because I forgot to say that last time. Happy Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Happy Lunar New Year. Happy Valentine's Day. And Shalom, everyone.